Spider-Man has had a lot of video games, and over the next couple of videos, I'm going to take a look at the games based off of the Sam Raimi movie trilogy. Today, I'm reviewing the first of the three, Spider-Man, not to be confused with the game that released 2 years prior, or the game that came out 16 years later. Anyways, let's actually talk about the 2002 Spider-Man movie game. The game begins with an option to play the tutorial. Now normally I wouldn't talk about a tutorial unless it was like super obnoxious, but this game has an enjoyable one. Even if all you're doing is going from one marker to the next, it's Bruce Campbell's sarcastic undertone that makes it so entertaining.
Well, good to see that you can follow basic instructions. You follow me? Well, stop following me or I'll have you arrested. Go ahead, give it a shot. I'll wait. But not for long.
There's also some hints outside of the tutorial, which can also be pretty funny.
Of course, you'd know this if you played the basic tutorial, but I guess you're just cooler than the rest of us.
That being said, in the movie, Peter didn't discover his powers inside of Virtual Boy, so the tutorial does lose some adaptation points. While we're on the subject of adapting the movie, how well does the game adapt the story from the film? The answer is complicated. If you've never seen the movie, you won't get the full picture by playing the game. The first 40 minutes of the film are summarized in a 40-second cutscene. It covers the bare minimum, at least in the parts where it even is following the plot. Like a lot of movie games from the era, it trails off into random subplots that have nothing to do with anything, which is understandable because I'm not sure if the film alone had enough stuff to make a game out of. But a lot of these side stories are kind of weak. Shocker and Vulture just show up out of nowhere, and you spend a fourth of the game chasing these guys. For what? Robbing a jewelry store. That's it. It doesn't relate to anything else in the story, and if you cut it out, you would lose nothing. There's this mildly interesting section with Scorpion. You're both being tracked by Oscorp due to having arachnid DNA. Scorpion thinks that you're working for Oscorp because the HKs are spider-shaped, which leads to a battle that results in Scorpion running away, never to be seen again. I like the ideas here, but it ends abruptly and doesn't really add anything to the overall narrative. The cutscenes can be described in one sentence. They're from 2002. Character models haven't aged the best, but at least the animations aren't stock motions. The CG cutscenes can also be described as being from 2002. I mean, they're better than the endgame ones, but everyone looks like they're made out of clay, and his webbing here looks like a basketball net. None of this is a huge deal. I mean, this is a video game. At the end of the day, you're not playing this game for the story. I just want to talk about it because I thought it was interesting. Now, let's talk about the game part of the game. The double jump is one of those that requires immediate activation, so you either double jump or you don't. Web swinging is fun despite the simplistic mechanics. It has a sense of agility to it, and there's a nice balance between speed and turning. The camera works like you'd expect, but if the angle changes while you're moving, the controls get all confused. This messes with wall crawling a lot too. Sometimes you won't go in the direction the analog stick is facing. The camera will automatically flip if you run in a certain direction for a while, but it's not fast enough in the heat of the moment. Thankfully, there's this nifty lock-on function that makes it easy to focus on targets during combat. Speaking of which, the combat is a mix of combos and web attacks. Punches and kicks are good for dealing damage to individual enemies, but not viable when facing off against a group, whereas more forceful attacks are slower but give you more breathing room. Each new combo adds increased mobility and makes the combat more enjoyable. There's a nice variety of attacks, and all the combos feature simple button combinations. Web attacks are also quite useful and add extra options, like using the web gloves on tougher foes, the web yank to knock enemies off platforms, the impact web gives you greater range, and nothing is more satisfying than detonating the web dome on a large group of thugs. That being said, you have a finite supply of web fluid, so you can't be careless when using it, though you can replenish the bar by picking up web tokens. While singular enemies aren't much of an issue, a group of them on the other hand are pretty rough, especially if some of them are holding guns. They are quick to fire and rarely miss. You can even take damage even if they don't actually hit you. It's just a shame that the second half of the game doesn't utilize the combat quite as well. The later stages introduce enemies you're recommended to avoid, meaning that you're not even using most of the combos you've unlocked. The game also begins to focus more on aerial combat, which isn't as good as ground combat. You can only attack once per swing, so you're spamming the jump button a lot then mashing the punch or kick button. It gets repetitive and lacks the freedom and variety of ground combat. Plus, you can't even use your web attacks. The only one available is the impact web, which is only effective on slower enemies. When you reach a certain height on the map, you can't swing anymore, which I understand is done to keep the players in bounds, but maybe enemies shouldn't be swarming around the top so frequently. You automatically stick to walls, so it's annoying when you accidentally bump into one. Plus, there's input delay when jumping off, which doesn't help. Despite my criticisms, the aerial combat can still be fun, it just gets old after a while. There are two types of levels, indoors and outdoors. We'll talk about the indoor stages first. The level design is well constructed around the controls, not restricting the movement while not being too easy to navigate. Levels reward clever maneuverability and pickups are placed in good areas. Combat tokens are hidden well outside of the ones that are in plain sight. Unfortunately, if you're missing any combos, there's no indication as to where those missing ones are. Plus, the game does a good job crafting challenges around Spidey's abilities. Like in Showdown with Shocker, you need to use the web zip effectively in order to avoid Shocker's blasts. In Chemical Chaos, you'll need to wall crawl in between security lasers. Vulture's Lair makes use of all the mechanics, with a wide range of obstacles that require quick reflexes. The stealth levels in particular do a good job at this, web zipping to the ceiling just in time to avoid getting caught, crawling from one shadowed area to another while keeping a lookout for guards, having to quickly move to a new hiding spot when the super soldiers find you. Unfortunately, there's a lot of waiting and it can get tedious. Oh, come on, are you really telling me he was able to see me up here? The outdoor levels are designed differently, featuring more open spaces where you swing around skyscrapers and run across rooftops. On the surface, these stages don't provide much of a challenge. I mean, how difficult can an assortment of high-rises be? As stated earlier, the swinging is not complicated at all, so traversal isn't challenging, and while you can plummet to your death, you're never gonna die from falling. And if you do, then I don't know what to say other than
Unplug the machine and walk away.
So how do these levels manage to remain engaging? Well, that would be the objectives that change the way these maps work. When you're chasing someone, buildings become obstacles that you have to cleverly swing around. Sometimes there will be collapsing structures that you'll need to quickly wipe up. The game throws in enemies and other hazards that make navigation more challenging. The outdoor levels do a good job mixing the simple swinging with a variety of objectives that keep the stages engaging. One small detail is that if you swing around the bottom of the map, citizens will interact with you.
Look up there, it's Spider-Man!
Just stay away from the bird and plane metaphors. That's that other guy.
Like most normal video games, Spider-Man has a decent number of boss battles. Uncle Ben's killer is an inconsistent first boss. Sometimes he's a joke, but then other times I can't even attack him. Vulture's fight is way too easy. The hardest part of it is getting the combat token at the top of the tower. He loses health so quickly, and there are so many pickups that you just don't need. Oscorp's ultimate weapon can be described as a non-stop barrage of attacks. Seriously, if it wasn't for the impact web, winning this battle would be unachievable. The Goblin fights are the best ones. They utilize both the ground combat and the aerial combat to their fullest potential. Goblin is a tough fighter and requires you to use all types of advanced combos to even put a dent into his health bar. And landing onto his glider and punching him is a lot of fun. None of the fights, besides Goblin, are particularly memorable, but they get the job done. So how's the game's difficulty balancing? Well, on normal mode, the game has a mild challenge. You might die a couple of times, but there aren't going to be any stages that will give you a lot of trouble. Hero mode is a different beast altogether. What happened to the difficulty progression? It just spikes up and down. At no point is this better shown off than Oscorp's Gambit, a level that on normal mode is pretty standard, but on hero mode, it's the hardest level in the game. And it's only the 4th stage out of 22. I don't even need to explain what's wrong with that. These robots are the bane of my existence because their attacks are nearly impossible to avoid, and when you have to deal with multiple of them at a time, it takes forever to kill them all. You can't even collect health without being in danger because there are spider bots on the rooftops. What's even worse is when these robots come back later, they die in one hit. Enemies aren't supposed to get easier on succeeding appearances. It's a shame that it has this problem because otherwise, hero mode really does make the most out of the game's design. But when you have to play the hard version of Oscorp's Gambit, is it really worth it? And don't even bother playing superhero mode. You don't get any rewards for it, and I'm not sure if it's even possible. I kept dying on the 2nd level and couldn't beat it, and I don't even want to think about what Oscorp's Gambit is like. After you complete a level, you will be rewarded with points which increase on higher difficulties. The qualifiers are different for each stage, and they often make the levels more challenging, like not getting spotted by a single guard or not using health and web refills. Though sometimes the requirements are unclear. For instance, when aiming for time bonuses, you're never actually told the time you have to beat. You just gotta be fast enough to get it. And some of these qualifiers are just impossible, like beating Oscorp's Gambit without taking damage. How? How? You'd be more likely to get struck by lightning twice on the same day than to get it perfect on this level. With the points you've earned, you can unlock some extra content. When you get 50,000 points, you unlock unlimited webbing. Okay, I guess this will make some of the bonuses easier. But by this point, why would I even bother going for more points when I've already gotten all the rewards? You also earn different skins once the campaign is completed, meaning that you can play as Peter Parker and reveal his secret to everyone. But when you beat the game on hero mode, you unlock the ability to play as the Green Goblin. I mean, you're playing playing as Harry in the Goblin suit, which does mess with the story because Harry's not supposed to find the suit until the end of Spider-Man 2, but I don't care. Compared to the normal campaign, the dialogue has been altered and new dialogue has been added, mostly because the story is different. Harry's trying to figure out what his father's evil scheme was, and there's a goblin imposter who's never identified, which is an underwhelming conclusion. We're basically left to guess who it is. I'm going to guess it's Scorpion. Who do you think it is? Let me know in the comments. Goblin's a lot of fun to play as. He's not as agile as Spider-Man, and you don't have web attacks during combat, but you can leave a trail of flames behind you. The glider is fast, controls well, and features better aerial combat. You have a nice variety of attacks, but they overheat quickly, so you have to be careful with how you use them. Goblin is a cool reward and adds some extensive replay value. There's also some training exercises that test your abilities. You're ranked depending on how fast you can complete the course. It's a nice distraction that takes advantage of Spidey's abilities in ways that probably couldn't have been done in the campaign. That being said, the automatic wall crawling becomes more than a minor annoyance, and the camera can be problematic in some courses. So that's Spider-Man, and overall, it's a solid game. It has a good foundation that's mostly well utilized and has a fair amount of difficulty. I'm going to give Spider-Man a 231 out of 296. Next time, I'm going to cover its better-known sequel, Spider-Man 2. If you enjoyed this review and want to see more just like it, I'd recommend web-zipping to the subscribe button and ringing the bell with an Impact Web. This is Nat, signing out from the network.